And so in today's session, we shall be looking at the essentials of open data. What that means is that we'll be spending time to define a couple of concepts, which include looking at what is data and what is open data. We shall also be looking at understanding the different formats and types of data. We shall seek to understand the components of open data. We will also define open government data. And finally, we will take time to review use cases of open data. What is data? In its simplest definition, data is a collection of facts in the form of either numbers, words, measurements, and/or observations. So let us explore a few data sets and see in what ways we can interpret the data and what conclusions you can draw from them. Take a look at this. How about this? What conclusions did you draw? Did you understand the data? Why is data important? Data is the basis for information, knowledge, and I dare say wisdom. When data is presented in an unstructured format, it denies the users useful insights and makes it very difficult to interpret it, understand it, and even use it for decision making. So when you were looking at the previous numbers, you couldn't tell what they were until they began to be presented in a structured format. And that information can be deemed useless information unless there is structure, which means that data needs to be organized in a consistent format such as tables, spreadsheets, or databases, which makes it easier to understand, which makes it easier to search when you have huge data sets, and also which makes it easier to eventually analyze and use for decision making. Now, what are the different formats of data? Today, I just want to share 4 common formats of data, and these are CSVs, tabular data, JSON, and XML. Let's start with CSVs, also known as comma-separated values. CSV is a simple text-based format where data is organized in rows and each value is separated by a comma. Each line typically represents a row of data and the values in the row correspond to columns, as I earlier mentioned. CSV is commonly used for exporting and importing data between spreadsheets, databases, and other systems. And a simple example of a CSV would be data that would perhaps include name, age, location. So for example, you would have a data set that says Alice, John, age 30, Nairobi, PO box, or address. Next, we talk about tabular data or spreadsheets. Tabular data refers to data that is organized into rows and columns, much like in tables or in a spreadsheet. And this is data that you will find when using Microsoft Excel or even Google Sheets. Each column represents a particular variable or field, and each row represents a record or an entry. This format is highly structured and widely used across organizations. It is also one of the simplest forms of collecting, inputting, and presenting data. Next, we look at JSON, also known as JavaScript Object Notation. JSON is a lightweight, human-readable format for structuring data, and it's commonly used in web applications to transmit data between servers and browsers. Normally, it would represent data as key value pairs, making it ideal for hierarchical or nested data structures. And here is an example. Finally, XML, also known as Extensible Markup Language. Did you know that, by the way? That's the meaning of XML. Now, XML is a flexible markup language that is used to encode data in a structured format. It uses tags to define elements and attributes to add more details. And this makes it useful for exchanging data across different systems. It's important to note that XML is both machine readable and human readable. Now, what other types of data do you know of? Let's explore further and talk about GIS data. GIS data is derived from a geographical information system which is designed to capture, store, analyze, manage, and it presents all types of geographical data. The key word here to note is geography or geographical, which means that some portion of this data is spatial, which makes it geospatial data. And so in that way, this type of data will have reference locations for different areas or different locations on the earth. When fused with traditional data such as project names or countries, then you would be able to map out specific projects in specific geographical locations. And therefore, GIS data can be a very effective tool on tracking, monitoring, and even evaluating the progress of certain projects. Now, let's talk about public intent data. There are different categories of public intent data, and it's important to start by understanding that public intent data is used by businesses or governments to better understand their target audience and really tailor their products or services accordingly. Some of these public intent data include administrative data, which is generated by a process of registration or record keeping. And this can be done by, say, national authorities or national statistical offices. It can also be done by other government organizations that require you to register for certain services like birth, marriage, or even death and tax records. Another type of intent data is census data. This is usually collected by the National Statistical Bureau, and it is systematically enumerated information about an entire population in a country or locality, all right? And in many countries, we have policies of when, in terms of frequency, and also the methodology in which census data is collected. Another type is what we call the sample survey data. This is drawn from a smaller representative sample of the entire population, and typically it could be either from a census to collect detailed information about certain phenomena or certain topics or subjects. We also have machine-generated data, which is data that is automatically generated by a sensor or an application or even a computer process without human interaction. And a simple example would be sensors that monitor air pollution, and they'll be able to give you that data. Or even if you have a smartwatch, you're able to see your exercise, the number of steps you've taken, you're able to see your heart rate. So this is something that could also be defined as machine-generated data because your smartwatch is connected to you, but it is automatically producing this type of information. Lastly, I want to talk about citizen-generated data, which is produced by individuals or citizens and often to fill gaps in public and private sector data, or also when they want to specifically collect and gather data about an issue that needs to be addressed. Now, we have an exciting course as part of our course offerings on citizen-generated data, and I would encourage you to take time when you're done with this course to also just sign up for that course and get more insights about citizen-generated data. What's big data? I'm sure you've heard of this term, and a lot of the conversations around data cannot be held without speaking about big data. Big data is about finding correlations. It is analyze, computationally to reveal patterns, trends, and associations, especially relating to human behavior and interactions. And therefore, an advantage of big data that has been argued is that it could provide faster, cheaper, and more granular data because it is more agile in meeting the growing demands of huge data sets that require to be analyzed for purposes of providing insights for better decision making. What is open data? Broad et al. 2015, specifically on page 35, offers an interesting definition of open data. And this is what they say. Open data is data made available by governments, businesses, and individuals for anyone to access, use, and share. And it's as simple as that. Now, what are the components of open data? For one to describe their data as open, it must have the following characteristics. It has to be accessible, it has to be machine readable, and it has to be reusable. Let's talk about the principles then that could guide open data. And I want to pay attention to the FAIR principles. These are components that borrow or were introduced from open science principles of FAIR, meaning that data should be, number one, findable. It should be easily discoverable by both humans and machines. Number two, it should be accessible, meaning it should be easy to retrieve in a clear and easy manner. And then we also talk about interoperable or interoperability. And what this essentially means is that data should be able to integrate and operate with other data sets and systems, allowing for effective data exchange and collaboration. And then finally, on the FAIR principles, is they have to be reusable. This means that data can be used for future research and applications, of course, with clear licensing and within legal frameworks. Now, let's move to another interesting concept on open government data. What is open government data? This is data that is collected, produced, or paid for by government entities and made freely available to the public for access, use, and redistribution. The essential goal of open government data is to promote transparency, accountability, and innovation. There are a couple of characteristics when it comes to open government data, and these include, number one, publicly accessible. Two, it should be free of charge. Three, it should be machine readable. Four, it should be non-proprietary. And five, in terms of licensing, open government data is typically published under open licenses, which then permits the free use, reuse, and redistribution. Examples of some of open government data could include public finance data that showcases government budgets, expenditure, tenders as well. It could also include health data that showcases disease outbreak information or health service delivery data, of course, without showcasing personal data. We could also have education data as part of open government data, where you get school performance metrics, enrollment rates, geospatial data, maps, environmental monitoring, urban planning information, as well as transport data, where you get access to public transit routes, traffic patterns on real time. So these are just a few examples of open government data. Why does open government data matter? Acemoglu and Robinson's theory on the success and failure of nations, as presented in their book Why Nations Fail of 2012, argue that the primary determinant of a nation's prosperity or poverty lies in its political and economic institutions. These authors propose that It is important for governments to ensure that certain things are either addressed and advocated for, while others are not, in order to ensure the success of a nation. Some of these issues include: one, inclusive institutions. Nations succeed when they have inclusive institutions and systems that promote broad participation in both economic and political activities, and also while ensuring they protect property rights and uphold the rule of law. Inclusive institutions, therefore, are more likely to foster innovation, competition, and economic growth by giving individuals the freedom and security to engage in productive activities. On the other hand, extractive institutions will lead to the detriment of a nation, or will cause a nation to fall, because an elite group of people are likely to control and hold power and resources for their own benefits. And so extractive institutions have the ability to limit economic opportunities for the majority of people, stifling innovation and preventing broad-based growth. It is important to note that extractive political systems as well are often characterized by corruption, lack of transparency, a weak rule of law, which eventually leads to economic stagnation and inequality. So how does this connect to open government data initiatives? Open government data initiatives are designed with an aim to make government-held data freely available to the public. In addition, they can be used as a method of promoting inclusive institutions in several ways. Number one, promoting transparency and accountability. Two, encouraging economic innovation and growth. Three, enhancing public participation, because it gives power to citizens to participate more actively in governance. And finally, it helps mitigate extractive tendencies. Finally, let's talk about the benefits of open data. For a nation, open data provides economic and social value. It provides transparency, and it enhances and increases participation and citizen engagement. To governments, open data saves time and money through discoverability of data, and it also reduces duplication. And finally, to the citizens, open data improves the quality of public discourse on public matters, because citizens have access to data and therefore they're more empowered, ready, and able to actively participate in matters development. I hope this session has been enlightening. I hope that now that we've set the ground on the definitions of key terms, as we continue with this module, we'll provide more insights into open data and the different strategies that one can use to implement open data initiatives, as well as other topics like legal frameworks and technologies. Adios.